Tonight, we have an update for you and a huge story we brought to you last week. Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs has officially filed his resolution to remove corrupt D.C. Circuit Court Judge James Boasberg from the bench. Congressman Biggs said in a statement, quote, "We cannot stand by while activist judges who incorrectly believe they have more authority than the duly elected president of the United States impose their own political agenda on the American people." Biggs also pointed out that his resolution could remove Boasberg from the bench by a simple majority rather than the 2/3 majority required by impeachment proceedings. As a reminder, Judge Boasberg is that judge that ordered the Trump administration to turn a plane full of Tren de Agua gang members / military paratroopers and return them back to the United States. He's now the judge also overseeing the Signal Gate case, conveniently, right? And he was also one of the cruelest judges who presided over J6 political prosecutions while he gave a corrupt FBI attorney named Kevin Kleinsmith a simple slap on the wrist for his part in propagating Russiagate. Here's a portion of our interview with Congressman Biggs last week on how his resolution will work and also codifying Trump's agenda.
There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here. If the government says we don't have to give process for that, then y'all could have put me up on Saturday and thrown me on a plane, thinking I'm a member of Tren de Agua and giving me no chance to protest it.
That was Judge Patricia Millay sticking up for the hardened criminals, or at least the paramilitary troopers. You know how we've talked about them at Tren de Agua. Join us now to discuss the obviously activist judges that plague our judiciary at large. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona. Congressman, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Emerald. Thanks for having me.
I know particularly because you have been very focused on not only the immigration issue, the open border, but just rule of law in general, right? Especially with your background. We have a real problem here in our judiciary in this country, Congressman.
Well, we certainly do. And the judge you just heard likening taking out international terrorist organization, which is what has been designated as such, where these people are being removed and claiming that they're like Nazis, that Nazis were treated better in America. I mean, that's, first of all, that's incredibly factually erroneous. Second of all, it's incredibly insulting. But thirdly, it gets to the point of this legislation from the bench, this bias that so many judges have. And she's not the only one. We're seeing this all over the place with dozens and dozens of lawsuits designed to stop the executive branch from enacting its agenda. And a lot of times they have no basis whatsoever, but they're pressing on anyway.
So I want to talk about solutions. There has to be some accountability for these judges, I feel like. There's been the suggestion on this show many times by many different people that perhaps Congress could bring in judges like Millay or some of those J6 judges who really didn't adhere to the rights of due process afforded under the Constitution, right, for the J6 defendants, that they should be brought in before Congress. That would probably be before your committee, the judiciary, and held accountable, that they should have to come in and testify and answer for their behavior on the bench. Is that something we might see in the near future? Is Congress going to do anything about these judges?
Well, I don't know you're going to see him come in on a panel. Some people want to do that, but I'm going to give you some other solutions that I've been working on. So for one of them, I've got a piece of legislation that takes away some of their jurisdiction with regard to injunctions and TROs, so that they cannot issue a nationwide injunction. That's just not going to happen. So that's one thing. Another thing, though, that I think is actually I'm starting to get some legs, and this is a fun one for me. This is to go to Article 3, Section 1. A lot of people are talking about impeachment, by the way. There's been probably half a dozen, I believe, articles of impeachment filed on some of these judges. I don't think that goes anywhere. So I wanted to find something that goes somewhere that's constitutional. So Article 3, Section 1 talks about, a lot of people, it talks about how long a judge can sit, a federal judge. And a lot of people think it's a lifetime. but that's not it. They only have a tenure during a time of good behavior. And who determines the good behavior? Well, I believe it's Congress that determines the good behavior. We set the jurisdiction, we do the confirmation, we create the lower courts, we can get rid of the lower courts, and it also says that they only have tenure for good behavior. So that tells me, Emerald, that what we could do, and I'm working on this now, this will be filed in the next day or two here, is an Article 3, Section 1 claim resolution that a particular judge, and we're looking at several, but we'll start with one, is no longer in good standing because they're not exercising good behavior, and they should be fired and terminated pursuant to Article 3, Section 1. That's what we're working on. I think that is a good way to go. And then there's always money. I mean, my colleagues should join me. We should be removing funding for certain courts because they're doing they're acting inappropriately, quite frankly. They're abusing their power and their authority. And that's what this all gets down to. We can get a bad ruling, a ruling that I don't like, but if it's not based on bias, then I can understand it. But some of these just seem so obviously biased that the judge needs to be held accountable.
I agree with you. And I think that based on some polling I saw today from Rasmussen Reports, a large part of the American public agree with you, Congressman Biggs. I find this resolution particularly interesting because it does seem like a valid constitutional solution, right? How much support do you have amongst your colleagues in Congress for such a resolution?
Well, so far it's picking up. I mean, let's face it, it has been ignored. Article 3, Section 1 has never been used in the history of the country. And so it becomes a bit of an interesting conundrum because people are like, well, that's right. That makes sense. But we've never seen it used. So they don't quite know how to use it. So I'm trying to lay that path out. We've got another bill that talks about how you use Article 3, Section 1. But I'm going to tell you that I believe that we can use the same simple majority in the House and the Senate that you use for confirmation. And this is a very different animal than impeachment because impeachment has all kinds of other connotations. It implies that you've committed a crime. We're doing something different. We're talking about good behavior and failure to adhere to good behavior.
And you know what? You're giving us a bit of civics lesson as well, Congressman Biggs, because I think a lot of Americans didn't know about that. Many people do believe they're lifetime appointments. So you're going to have to educate people a little bit like with this. I do want to clarify what you said. One of the provisions that might be allowed under this, getting rid of the lower court. Can you just expound on that a little bit? I find that very interesting.
Yeah. So the only court that is constitutionally created is the U.S. Supreme Court. The Congress is given specific authority to create what the Constitution calls lesser courts. And so from very early on, you had legislation from Congress to create district courts and appellate courts. And that's the system we have today. And they also broke them up into districts. So now we have various districts. You know, I live in the 9th district. I'm not sure what district you live in. But those districts are organized with various district courts, the lower courts, the lowest courts, and then the appellate court. And then you have the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court is the only one that has original jurisdictions mentioned in the Constitution. None of the other courts have any jurisdiction except for what Congress gives them through statute. That means that Congress can give you jurisdiction, it can take away jurisdiction. Congress can create a court, we can eliminate a court. That's what's meant in Article 3, Section 1.
I think this is very interesting. I think this is something to keep our eye on. I hope you get, the support continues to grow. You say you're going to file this in a couple days, this resolution?
Yes, that's correct. Before the end
we'll be watching.
Yeah, before the end of the weekend.
Okay, great. You know what I feel like? I feel like, though, and this brings us to my next topic before we run out of time, we're not hearing much about the legislative agenda of this second Trump term, right? We're watching Doge, we're looking for accountability perhaps at the FBI. There's lots of squirrels around, but we haven't talked much about the legislative agenda. That's something that your colleague, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, who feels like a neighbor to me, noted on Twitter or X yesterday saying, he said, get off your victory lap. We're one flu season away from losing our majority. Make us follow through with codifying real Donald Trump's agenda. The only piece of legislation that got some interest in the public was that presented by another Tennessee congressman, Andy Ogles, suggesting that there should be legislation allowing for a third Trump term that was filed just a couple days after inauguration. So what is the legislative agenda, number one? And number two, is that possible? Ogles' legislation could actually pass, and there is a pathway to a possible third Trump term?
So let's cover the. I don't believe there's a path for Andy Ogles' resolution to go forward, Emerald. If you want the truth, I'm always going to tell you the truth. I just don't.
That's
see
absolutely the truth.
Yeah. I don't see that there's a path there for that. But when we start talking about what the agenda for Congress is, Tim Burchett is right on the money. It is actually to codify much of what President Trump has done through executive order, and then to also press and make sure that you've taken care of border security, make sure that you've funded projects that need to be funded, make sure that you're deregulating, making sure that you're getting the tax package that President Trump campaigned on, and frankly, most of Congress campaigned on those things. That's really the plan. So if I were to break it down in a few areas, I would say economically, budget-wise, you have to do the tax package. You have to find ways to reduce spending, and you have to reduce regulation. All of those are happening through the executive branch. Congress needs to do the same. The other thing that Congress has been doing on the deregulation front is we have passed a good number of CRAs, Congressional Review Acts, where we've taken out some regulations by the Biden administration, which leads me to one of my bills, which actually gets to the deregulation part, where my bill, the Midnight Rules Relief Act, actually says we can do more than one at a time. That's why it's so doggone slow, is because you can only do one at a time. And now I bring them in. And by the way, Emerald, the Biden administration in the last 60 days or 70 days, they did over 1,400 final rules that impact the budget and our economy by $1.34 trillion. And so my bill says, if we want to, we can go back and get rid of all of those and save over $1 trillion to our structural deficit that's so bad right now. So those really are the areas. And then of course the other two areas are border. You got to take care of the border, make sure that really is taken care of for certain. And then the ultimate thing is to shrink the federal government, and that's what's happening.
Like that one.
Yeah, and I call that, by the way, new federalism, because that's what Trump is doing. He's engaging in new federalism, and that's really
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's an easy, simple explanation of it. And look, we love that you give it to us straight. That's why we like to have you on The Absolute Truth, Congressman Biggs. When your resolution is filed this week, we will share it with our audience. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Emerald.
And speaking of rogue judges, Georgia Judge Amy Totenberg dismissed the infamous Curling vs. Raffensperger case on standing more than a year after the trial. Now, just to remind you, that's the case in which cybersecurity expert Professor J. Alex Halderman sensationally hacked a voting machine right there in court during that trial, right before the very eyes of the judge in a matter of seconds. Also, the professor's report commissioned as a part of the case, which Totenberg tried her best to keep from seeing the light of day, revealed that votes could be flipped in a variety of ways electronically, leaving no trace behind whatsoever of manipulation. Report also forced CISA to admit that the voting machines are vulnerable. But alas, all is not lost. Just because rogue judges are complicit in allowing election fraud doesn't mean there won't be accountability. The reason our show is a little different today, if you might have noticed, is because today I have been busy in Washington, D.C., meeting with very high-level sources, including Department of Justice sources, working on what is perhaps the biggest and most important story in our country's history. While there'll still be some time before I can bring that information and story to you and the public, I suggest you go to the election fraud thread pinned to the top of my X account at Emerald Robinson, where I am methodically and continually laying out the timeline and background of what exactly happened in the 2020 election leading into 2024. There are currently over 100 tweets in that thread with never before revealed information to prime you for what's to come. You may ask yourself, why do we focus on election fraud so much? Well, probably you and my audience don't ask that because you care as much as I do. But it's because of stories like the one we shared with you last week. Election fraud and elections quite literally mean life and death for millions of trafficked children being brought into our country, as HHS whistleblower Tara Lee Rodas and Aaron Stevenson, a DHS whistleblower, exclusively explained on the show last week.
We want to talk about family separation? 500,000 children under Joe Biden were trafficked into this country. They can't find 300,000 of them. That's a separation. But you know what President Trump's committed? We're going to find them, and we're going to save them, because many of these children are in forced labor, many of these children are in forced sex slavery. We're going to save them. This administration.
That was President Trump's administration border czar, Tom Homan, explaining why the Trump administration was so committed to our nation's border security. He was specifically talking about a new report that has come out from detailing from fiscal years 2019 to 2023 that ICE transferred more than 448,000 unaccompanied minors to HHS, Health and Human Services. Most were released to sponsors. However, this is sickening. More than 31,000 of the 448,000 children's released addresses were blank, undeliverable, or missing apartment numbers. ICE also was not always aware of the location for UACs who fled HHS custody. Now, it seems as though the entire Trump administration is deeply committed to this vital mission. Here's the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, on the mission to stop child sex trafficking at the border.
500,000 children were trafficked into this country under Joe Biden. That is a stain on our national conscience. It's a stain on our history. It's ending now. And the Department of Justice, working with the Department of Homeland Security, is going to prioritize the end of human trafficking, the end of human smuggling, and the entire machinery of government is going to be used to stop the cartels, to stop the coyotes, to stop the traffickers, to stop the smugglers from preying on our citizens and exploiting our country.
And joining us now are two federal whistleblowers who have been all over this tragic story of the missing children from the very beginning. Of course, you know Tara Lee Rodas. She's joined us several times. We're pleased to welcome Aaron Stevenson, another whistleblower from DHS, with us today. Thank you both. This is probably, honestly, the most important topic we cover on the show.
Yes. Well, thank you, Emerald, for having us on to talk about what we've known is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
I want to introduce Aaron to our audience a little bit because they're familiar with your story, Tara Lee, but they're not quite as familiar with Aaron. Some might know about him, but Aaron, really, you kicked this off. You were the first person who saw trafficking back in 2021. I don't know how much of your story you can share personally, but I'll let you two kind of introduce Aaron to our audience.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all. So in brevity, I'm going to be very brief about myself.
Okay.
What I found was actually very black and white. It wasn't hard to read at all. We were getting notices that watch-listed transnational criminal organizations were actually sponsoring the children. So this is like fingerprint verification. We know that this guy's on the watch list and he's a bad guy. And he was giving us fingerprints to, as part of the process, if you will, to receive one of these kids. And it was an emergent thing. That hadn't happened before. The first instance I found of that was in February 2021. It was actually on February 10th, 2021. And then over a period of time, over what ended up being 10 months before they were moving from this thing, you would see a pattern of basically every like 3 to 4 weeks, you would see another gang member on the watch list trying to get a kid. So when I saw the third one, I saw kind of a pattern and a trend kickoff, which was these were coming from gangs in different parts of the world and from different gangs as a whole. So when I saw the third one, this was in April of 2021. It was a total of so far 3 members, but one was from 18th Street Gang, one was from MS-13, and one was from Romania. And the other 2 countries were from Guatemala and El Salvador. So this shows you right away, like, okay, this is emergent, this is expansive, something's going on. And that's when I was like, okay, that's enough for me. I had already tried pushing this to the government. I made a lot of phone calls, talked to a lot of agencies. Nobody was having control of this thing. So that's what led me to go public with it when I did a few months later.
Yeah,
And
and
you were
so that
retaliated
was the
against.
amazing. Sorry, go ahead, Emma.
I was just going to say, and it's not that he was thanked for his admission about what was going on or bringing to light the truth of the human trafficking threat that was emerging and obviously becoming a trend. He was retaliated against, right, Tara?
Yes. So Aaron was actually ended up being walked off his job and fired. However, thankfully, in August when he went public, we in the Pomona Fairplex, we were sitting there, we had been reporting trafficking. And most people know the story. We had been reporting since June of 2021 that kids were being sponsored. And we believed it was trafficking because the children were saying they didn't know who they were going to. We had children, like 44 children, going to an address, just like the report revealed yesterday. So I'd really like to thank IG Kafari, the Honorable Inspector General for DHS, and the whole DHS OIG team for actually, again, putting out another report revealing what we've been saying since 2021, which is that children are going to people who have not been properly screened, and then there's no concurrent vetting after they're released. So they're not screened by HHS because HHS is not law enforcement. They're not capable of looking for trafficking indicators. And so fortunately, Aaron raised the flag. And when I saw it was MS-13, my husband is from El Salvador. You all know my story. I knew about MS-13 and I couldn't believe it. And so we circulated that around the site and found the first MS-13 affiliate within 2 weeks. And that ultimately is what got me walked off the site. But it was Aaron, thankfully, for this brave whistleblower who identified that transnational criminals, MS-13, 18th Street Gang, just like was arrested yesterday in Virginia, are getting kids. Now, my question is, was he a sponsor of children?
Do we know that answer?
No, we don't know, but we could easily find out if somebody at HHS would look at the data. He had 5 children in his home. Were any of them unaccompanied minors? This is part of the story that's not being told.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really heard anything about it until you raised it, Tara.
Yeah. We've been sounding the alarm that people need to share the data at HHS. This is the key.
So speaking of HHS, RFK Jr. has had this to say about the missing children. Listen.
President Trump has personally spoken to me about locating those 300,000 children who disappeared over the last 4 years.
I don't think anybody has a fully accurate number, but it's hundreds of thousands, I agree.
And many of them we know have been sex trafficked and childhood slavery, and it is a blight on America's moral authority, and we need to find those kids.
He sounds committed to finding those children, but why is the data not being released? What I hear from you, Tara, a little bit, and correct me, Aaron and Tara, if I'm wrong, is that even under the Trump administration and RFK Jr.'s leadership at HHS, we're still not getting what we need to find these children?
Can I nerd out here a little bit?
Yes, I love that. I love nerding out.
My background as an analyst, so I'm going to give it to you as I've been doing this thing, as myself anyways. So the problem starts off, first off, with inherent structure. This is not a system as you would know it as an actual system. This is a process or a procedure, but it's governed by, multiple different layers of governance. So it starts off with the Florida Settlement Agreement, the Homeland Security Act. They've got some overlay inside of it. The TVPRA, they've got some, jurisdictional oversight and mandates. So because you have this patchwork like quilt of legislation, if you will, you have this patchwork approach to the executive as well. And that's part of the problem. So first and foremost, as far as the problems, they're kind of twofold. There's an executive problem and a legislative problem. The executive problem is kind of being handled right now. Mr. Holman and the president have done an excellent job at controlling the border. So this kind of stops the flow of kids going into that trafficking economy. But then there's problem number two, which is these kids are out there, and the current system as it stands right now, because it's not even really a system, they cannot do an intelligent solution to find the networks, to understand the networks, to then go after the kids as well. And this is where the executive has, and I believe will, and they're going to, create basically a synthesized process to be able to soak up all information across the government. Because this is the problem is, you can't find a kid by looking for just the kid's data. And they've done this, by the way, in a few different states. Virginia and Florida are two examples where they went after the released address. And we're talking less than 5% of the kids were actually at the address. Yeah, because they get trafficked, and that's part of the whole operation is they don't keep the kid in one location. So to basically address that, they're going to have to go across the whole government approach and suck up all the data throughout the entire government on these aliens. By doing so, then you can basically do a targeting approach to finding where these kids have gone to. And that's it. That's your executive problem. There's a semi-executive solution. The legislature is going to have to get involved anyways, regardless, because they got to fix this patchwork quilt of just this nightmare of law, which dictates this entire process. By doing so, you can then create an actual system. As if you've gone through the OIG report, which Tara and I have done a few times now, they've given a few solutions, but they never give feedback loops. And this is a huge part of it. Tara talked about one of those things already, which was concurrent vetting. You can't, and I'm saying this as an analyst who's done vetting before, you can't vet for child trafficking. There's no indicators and warnings which are going to guarantee a high confidence, like that guy's a trafficker or that guy's not a trafficker. So concurrent vetting is a solution because that's a feedback loop. It's not just give a kid go, it's give a kid and we're going to monitor. You're going to come check in. We're going to have local law enforcement. There are things that you can do there, but it does take an aggressive, assertive, executive to do so.
So in doing legislation, it sounds to me like the legislators, the congressmen, their staff really need to get with people like you and come up with the solution and the bills to write to get this to work. Have you had any conversations? Is there any movement on that whatsoever? I know Congressman Biggs has highlighted repeatedly the missing children. He's brought it up in multiple hearings, but as far as actually codifying new systems, as you say, Aaron, and I've never heard anybody explain it that way, in codifying those, has there been any engagement?
To my understanding, no. And I don't think that's out of lack of trying or lack of knowledge. I just think it's a different problem than people realize. And also, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm also much more focused on the executive part right now as a whole. That's my background as a Marine. I've gone to war numerous times. It's just, hammer nail. It's how I see things. That I believe is the most urgent matter is getting these kids, quickly and efficiently out of this trafficking environment. And then, don't get me wrong. It's that's not going to be easy. I understand that, but it's also worth the effort, I believe. But then as far as the legislative part, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the smartest legislative guy in the room either. I know there's a problem. I can see that there's a gap problem for a lot of these things. I'm happy to help. Don't get me wrong, but I also want to be the one focused on the actual executive part, which is being involved in the analysis, the networking, the process and the system to get the kids first out of the trafficking environment.
So what I'm hearing from Aaron, Tara, is a willingness to serve. But that's going to need some action as well.
Yes. Well, my recommendation, and I'm not sure if you have it or not, but I actually did nominate Aaron for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I did call for his reinstatement, his immediate reinstatement to DHS. And I think that these children, their best hope right now is somebody who's got knowledge, experience, the person who identified this new and emerging threat, and that's Aaron Stevenson. Aaron can make a difference in saving these children. He can make a difference in targeting the networks and helping to dismantle this trafficking infrastructure. So Aaron can help change this game. He can, wherever there are children being trafficked, he's got ways to go after that. And I would highly recommend anybody who's listening, if you're out there, you should quickly reinstate Aaron Stevenson to DHS.
I can't think of anyone more deserving for the Medal of Freedom, right? Because saving our children, saving children in general, is such a noble cause. And you were the first person to speak up when you saw Aaron. So we really hope that someone's listening, and that not only will you get the Medal of Freedom, which is a high honor, but more importantly, that you get back to work, because we need you working. Also, I know a lot of my viewers are going to want to know how they can help, because I mean, this is an issue that keeps you up at night, especially if you're a parent yourself to children. Tara, people can go to America's Future and get involved. What else should they do?
Yeah, well, I think that they should get involved with America's Future and get in the fight. So if they're in Wisconsin, we're about to come there. So we're coming April 25th and 26th. Parents can learn, grandparents can learn what are trafficking warnings and indicators, and then they can report those things. So we want to help parents identify before the child is harmed. So what are some of the ways a child might start to begin to behave differently that would give you that warning or indicator that perhaps they're being groomed, and grooming leads to trafficking? So I would say get in the fight, and they could do that at americasfuture.net. And the splash page right now is our event that is coming to Wisconsin. So Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
I also want to ask you real fast, because that brings up another question I have. When we're talking about finding these missing children that came in from outside of the country, okay? And I don't know, maybe you see them in grocery stores. Maybe maybe they are out and about, or are they in the school system? How do people maybe identify, and it's probably a longer conversation, do you broach that in your training, maybe identifying kids in the community that are not, in your personal circle there, that might have been some of these trafficked kids? Because there's still, how many are we missing that were trafficked into the United States?
Well, we do know that over 500,000 have crossed the border. And so of those, the federal government cannot say for certain where any of those children are, and that's unacceptable. So the numbers show over 300,000. Exactly how many, we don't know. That's just during the last administration. That's just under the Biden and Harris administration. That doesn't count the decade before. So how many children are lost right now in our nation? And remember, HHS is not just over the unaccompanied children program. They're also over foster care and CPS. So going after this problem allows us to go after that problem too. But yes, we do tell people what to look for, and also how to report. And if they can, use their cell phone, take a picture. Don't intervene yourself, call law enforcement. We teach people what to look for and then how to report.
It's a huge effort. It's going to be a huge effort to find these children, and they deserve to be found. It's heartbreaking. And I think every person, if they could do something to help, most people would. So go to America's Future so that you can get educated on what you might do. And Aaron, yes, the last word.
I just wanted to slip in two things. The first one was, and that number, by the way, of the 500,000 missing kids, or the kids that came through the border, that came through a government program. Those are ones that we actually tracked and traced for a little while. That does not account for any child that got smuggled across the border, not through this program. So that number is going to grow. And that's going to be another part of the whole, don't set a low bar, guys. Let's go for all the kids, as Tara said as well, especially when it comes to the CPS trafficking, the foster care trafficking that happens. That's an expansive conversation, And the second thing is, as far as what to do, you're talking to a former atheist for 10 years. Pray. And this is what President Bukele said a while too, was the first thing we did is we started to pray as a country. So that is very, very imperative. It's a part of this thing. If we don't, I can tell you where it goes. It's not good.
Yeah, that's a great point. We should all be praying, vigilantly praying, getting together and praying for these children and for solutions and for finding them. And we didn't even get into Catholic charities today, which our good friend Joe Rossi has sent over some information. I know he's been talking to you, Tara, so that's great that you're in communication. We'll have to get into that on another day. Let's get Aaron reinstated so he can get back to work doing what he knows how to do. It's so wonderful to meet you, Aaron. And Tara, always lovely to see you.
It's great to see you, Emerald. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you all.
to get better, hence the better briefing. So the news site Axios, which is so lightweight that it's probably the favorite outlet of the gay men's chorus of Washington, D.C., suddenly claimed to have a scoop. And that scoop was that the Trump White House was going to take charge of the seating chart for future press briefings. Now, folks, you all know I've been telling you what that was happening for the last 3 months. The White House Correspondents Association is dead meat. Put a fork in them because they're done. The WHCA was a loose collection of Obama's favorite trannies and Chinese spies and, sort of foreigners and green cards who all pretended to be America's top reporters, even though many of them were not even American. These clowns did nothing but lie to the American people about Joe Biden's mental incompetence for 4 years. They protected that nursing home patient from public scrutiny and almost destroyed our country in doing so. They were never journalists or reporters. They were merely foot soldiers for Barack Obama and his lackey, Joe Biden. That's why it's the right time to throw these weasels out of the White House press room and out of journalism completely. I'll talk to you about that and much more with the very fun Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett last week. Here's an absolute truth breaking exclusive. The Trump administration is discussing the elimination of both the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities by an executive order similar to the one that eliminated IMLS on March 14th. That's according to two sources. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short, is right now fighting to save your hard-earned tax dollars from being spent not just on left-wing indoctrination programs, but on absurd things that are merely meant to waste your money and give leftists and their friends jobs, if you can call them that. Don't believe me? Okay, well, the waste gets even weirder. Future historians will note that the exact grant that targeted the NEA for elimination was a $10,000 grant to the, quote, Bearded Ladies Cabaret to support a cabaret show on ice skates focused on climate change. Drag queens, obviously. Also, the federal government's funding of a circus is a sideshow. Over the past several years, the National Endowment for the Arts granted Fern Street Community Arts, Inc. $365,000 for circus performances. Now, the U.S. federal government hasn't been serving we, the people. They've been using our hard-earned tax dollars to fund a left-wing freak show. And President Donald Trump is empowering Elon Musk to put an end to that freak show and send your money back to you where it belongs. We also learned that DOGE has already made a visit to the NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities, last week, causing shakeup and nerves over there. My next guest, Congressman Tim Burchett, the Republican representing Tennessee's 2nd Congressional District and who serves on the Congressional DOGE Committee, said this.
Failed to do that. Let me ask you, why did you call President Trump a fascist and a deranged racist sociopath in 2020?
Congressman, I appreciate the opportunity to address this. I regret those tweets. I would not tweet them again today. They represented a time where I was reflecting on something that I believe that the president had said rather than who he is. I don't presume that anyone is a racist.
You don't believe anyone is a racist?
I don't start by presuming anyone is a racist.
That was with Catherine Mayer, who was the NBC or NPR CEO, who is trying to pretend she's not anti-Trump anymore. And with that, let's bring in Congressman Tim Burchett himself to respond to what's going on in Congress. Congressman, it's good to see you.
Ma'am, that was just almost a surreal experience. I had that little clip you put up there, that went viral, I guess millions of views. And to me, it was just obscene what that, the first question I asked him was about, I'd actually listened to NPR. I'm not sure what had happened, if I got hit in the head or something, and I was forced to listen to it. But they asked a lady asked, I think it was another lady, said, what's your definition of propaganda? And her direct response was Lee Greenwood singing God Bless the USA. I know Lee Greenwood. I sit with him at football games when he comes to Tennessee, and I consider him a friend. He calls me by my name. I've known him since I was in the state legislature, actually. And to say that song is propaganda to me is just offensive. It tells what's really at the core. And then, of course, they always respond with, well, that's not NPR's position. That was just our guest, or that was just our host. Well, who the heck's position it? How else you going to get the message out if it's not by a guest or a host? And the reality is they hate us. They hate our country. They're a bunch of overeducated, arrogant folks that are very bitter about their lot in life, and they want to condemn us for our beliefs. They always celebrate diversity unless it's one step away from them. And so, I have very little faith that they'll fix their problems. I don't care what they say. They can say whatever they want. I just don't want my dadgum tax dollars paying for it.
So they should just completely go away.
Well, I think it won't go away. They'll tell you that, well, we're not dependent on government funding in one voice, and then they say we got to have it. They're funded by other entities. They have all these liberal Bill and Melinda Gates. I'm not sure how that works. They're not married anymore, but they have they fund several of the programs, from what I understand. A bunch of these other billionaires do, and let them fund it. I just don't want my tax dollars paying for it any more than I want them paying you or Fox News or Newsmax or anybody else.
I absolutely totally agree with that. My concern is that we continue to legitimize them, though, right? And the White House, though, they have made huge strides in opening up the press pool to a lot of people. She still calls on NPR and Reuters and AP, even though they're not in the pool anymore. It makes me laugh. And the front two rows all the time. So I wonder if we should just stop, if you just stop even legitimizing them by calling on them or going on their shows. Though I do have to point this out. You going on their shows is better than most of the other people going on their shows because you give it right back to them. In fact, let's go ahead and take a fun look at this compilation you put on Twitter. It's a knockout with Congressman Burchett. Let's watch.
Good thing I'm not.
What's wrong with you all?
Congressman?
You are so out of touch with what 85% of this country does not support what you are spewing, so these criminals can stay in this country. This is all this is. This is overreach, and I'll guarantee you, if his kids had been murdered or raped, as has happened in this country to several American citizens by these thugs, that he would be taking a different position.
You all do not support one cut. CNN, you all do not support one dadgum cut in any of this stuff. You're trying to use the lowest denominator. You're trying to scare the most people to drive the train against Trump, and it's not working.
Well, then why are y'all not exposing it? Have y'all even talked about, hey, Mozambique, we sent them $10 million for circumcision?
Okay. Now, if everyone gave that to them like that, I might be okay. But I feel like so many of your colleagues, I mean, look, my beef with Signalgate is that these people are all in their Rolodex, right? They're the first name that pops up, people like Jeff Goldberg. So should we just stop should politicians and the Trump administration and your colleagues in Congress just stop even talking to them?
That seems to be probably where we're headed. I do like taking it to them. I'm one of the few that will, as you stated. Well, I don't know about that. I stumble through it, and they laugh at me, I'm sure, behind my back. And I get the threatening calls every time I'm on one of those radical shows.
Do you?
And that's,
from who?
Oh yeah.
From who?
Yeah. It's funny. It's usually nobody in my district or in the state of Tennessee. I think they just get on their high horse and they think they can talk ugly to a little girl in my office. Like that's going to change my view. If anything, that just emboldens me against the left even more. So it's funny. I can call the office back in Tennessee when I've been on one of those shows, and they'll say, "I guess you were on CNN again today." I say, "Yeah." And I mean that's their modus operandi, man. That's how they operate. It's not a straight up bunch of people. I was on. It might have been your last time I was on with you. I can't remember, and somebody showed it to me on some right wing watch. Keep an eye on these people. Yeah. They're dangerous. I think I might have mentioned.
It was definitely me then. I'm one of their favorites.
I might have mentioned Jesus or something that was caustic to them, and they all flipped out. So, I don't care. Look, I know they're my enemies. They're never going to be for me. And that's the trouble with too many conservatives or pseudo conservatives. They go to the universities and they think, oh, I'll write an editorial, which nobody will read but the left, or something that's, moderate or something showing how diverse I am and where I am with everything. And they'll understand. And no, they won't. They will gut you like a fish as soon as they get the opportunity. You're a useful idiot to them. You will never be part of their group. And that's just the way it is. And so I have no desire to be part of their group. I'm going to say one last thing about that. My daddy, before he died, very God-fearing man, he had a massive stroke and he was down here at Veterans Nursing Home right before he died. And I was the mayor of the county then, and I was fighting the chamber and the big boys on probably a big spending bill they wanted to spend, and I didn't. And I walked in there and my daddy grunted out. We couldn't understand because he had a massive stroke. And he said, "Are they after you again?" And I said, "Yeah, Daddy, they are." And he said, "Do you really want that bunch for you?" And I thought, wow, my dad's getting ready to meet the Lord. And he threw that little bit of wisdom on me. I'm going to hang on to that one forever.
I know I would have loved your daddy. I love your stories about your daddy. Speaking about big bills and massive spending and all the other things that go along into these big bills, you also posted this video, which also made me laugh for different reasons. This is you talking about what's going on in Congress at the moment. Listen.
Going after our friends, I'm sure. And we allow those crazy amendments on there. They get 3 votes, and I can't even get a bill on the floor to defund the Taliban or stop selling genetic material to our enemies. 5 bills. I guess the major one was, I'm sure they'll do a victory lap on this one. Walk-in coolers and freezers. It was basically the Biden administration had put some terrible rules and regulations, and it outlawed our basically American manufacturers, and it created an inlet for the foreign and our adversaries to do business. So it's a good piece of legislation. It need to be passed, but we're not fulfilling President Trump's Doge agenda.
I actually pointed out your tweet the other day on the show saying, stop taking a victory lap. Make us codify Donald Trump's agenda. And that is a real concern. I mean, Trump is doing what he can with the stroke of a pen, right? And
yes,
interpreting rules at the agency, then with Doge. But there comes a point that Congress has to act. What is going on? Because it feels like is it from the Trump administration? Are they not pushing their agenda in Congress? What breakdown is happening?
They're drinking out of a fire hose or out of a Atlantic Ocean, basically, is what's going on. They're cutting into so much. And Washington is the real sewer of Washington. Everybody wants to call it a swamp. I've gone to that. It's not a swamp. It's a sewer. Is the staff. You hear powerful chairmen say, "Oh, I can't pass that. My staff doesn't approve of that." Excuse my language, but who the hell elected their dadgum staff? You've got some of these big committees have over 50 staff members on each side of the aisle. And, I think that's where a lot of the corruption occurs. I think that's where a lot of lobbyists get somebody's ear and they can pigeonhole a bill or stall it or delay it or kill it, and it never even gets heard. Can you imagine all this is going on right now that we are paying $40 million a week to the Taliban, and I can't get that bill out? And Tlaib had a horrible anti-Semitic bill or amendment on a bill that she got out, and it only got 3, and they wanted to put the Democrats on the record. Well, they did, and they proved that they're not anti-Semitic, just 3 knuckleheads were, which we knew all along they were. And all it does is feed their base and reelects them. And I can't get a bill out. Another one dealing with genetic material. Now, here's what's going on. This is scary. You send your genetic material off, and it's not blood. They just take a swab of your mouth, and you find out, you've got, you're related to the king or the queen or something. It's never, your ancestors are never horse thieves like mine were. They're always somebody royalty. But anyway, so you think, oh, this is great. This is so cool. Here's my certificate. I'll hang it on my wall for $50. Well, guess what happens to that genetic material? It gets put in a computer somewhere. And guess what happens then? The Chinese buy it. And guess what they do with it? They create a genome, which is basically a genetic history. And so say that they could be, and that, well, let's just say they are, okay? I'll just say they are. They're creating a genome where they could create a biological entity. Oh, COVID, for instance. But say they want to create a genome, which this is what is really scary, that could stop childbearing age women in America from having children, which is something they're trying to develop. That is what we're after. That is what's going on. And this Congress, because they've got some high-powered lobbyist down on K Street, has got somebody's ear. I can't get the bill out. And then you saw last week where the company went bankrupt. And guess what? They're selling their genetic material and information to the highest bidders. I wouldn't, look, if you've done it, don't, it's too late. If you're thinking about, don't do it. Do not do it. Just when you get to heaven, ask God who your ancestors were, or get your family Bible out and do like the Mormons do and dig it out that way. But look, this is a trap, and I can't get a bill out of committee, and we can't get a single and name me one Doge thing we've passed. Department of Education. We're not looking at the Pentagon. We're not looking at any of this stuff. And it just gets caught up in these committees. And the problem with leadership, and I love our leadership. They are honestly, I love our speaker. I think he's a good man. It's a huge, huge job, but it's just almost too big to control. And when you get into leadership and you get into these positions, a lot of the times all you're about is preserving your leadership. You're not about becoming saving our country. That's pretty apparent, both parties. And that's the truth. And that's why I won't, and that's why I won't ever be, and that's why I won't ever be in leadership, and I'll never be. And I'll get a primary for me saying this. I've already heard the threats from the big boys. They've already tried to send me to behind the woodshed already. They sent somebody down to talk to me about I needed to quit saying stuff. Yes, and I said, but it's the truth though, right? He goes, well, yeah, it's the truth, but you need to quit saying it. And so, I'm sick of it. I'm afraid we're going to lose our country. It's bigger than Tim Burchett, and we got to take the gloves off.
And that's why we appreciate you, and we often ask you on the show. And I know you've been out talking to your constituents today, industry people in your district, regular, Tennesseans. And Doge is extremely popular. They understand that we have a real problem. And even Elon Musk, I think what he said in his interview last night, even with all his efforts, they'll cut the deficit by about $1 trillion. There's still another $1 trillion. Right. And that's really going to rely on Congress. So what does it take? People like you get threatened. Does regular people not in politics and immediate, do they have to start screaming louder? Do they have to start more phone calls? How do we solve this?
Look, as I told my friend Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't know if she ever been on your show or not, but as I told her one day, I said, our problem's not going to come from the Marxists across the aisle. It's going to come within this ring. And, we're all there's Republicans. We've got to start electing people. And we've got to start holding them accountable. And we got to start following up. They say, oh, we passed this, whatever, and then you look at all the individual things that never get done. We have hearings every day. We had the hearing on NPR. We had the hearing on PBS, and I dare say that there's probably half a dozen bills out there to defund all those things, but there really is no apparatus to put the Doge suggestions into play. And we need to work on that. We need to work on our messaging better. We're, you're going to cancel Medicaid and Medicare. No, we're not. All they want to do is cut the waste, abuse, and fraud out. And that would provide more money for the least amongst us. That would provide more money for the people that need it. And that's the only cuts that we're going to be making there. And I think we just have everybody's just trying to play survival, and we need to worry about the survival of our great country.
Now, I don't know if you heard at the top of the show, we have been told by several sources, actually at this point it's more than two, I cited two, that the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Humanities are on the chopping block. But look, even during the first term, they were still funding this leftist, crazy art. It's not art. So how do you feel about that? Real quick before we go.
100%. One of my areas of certification was art education, ma'am. And this is just another boondoggle. It's like at the Smithsonian years ago, they were apologizing for us dropping the bomb on Japan, dropping the bombs. Look, my dad fought the Japanese. They were brutal, evil people back then. They're not anymore, obviously. But it was a war, and we ended it, and we saved the world. And my dad's generation, my mom and dad, mama flew an airplane during the war, and dad was in the Pacific Marine Corps, and God bless them. And my mama lost her brother fighting the Nazis. And yet, this is the kind of stuff they put out in the past. And the NEA, I can remember a few years back where they had the crucifix in urine, and they had all this other stuff. It's just so offensive. And if you even questioned it, you're not hip or in. Well, I don't want to be hip or in. They can do it without me. Nobody's saying they can't put that filth out, but I'm saying, dadgummit, you're not going to do it with my tax dollars. People are overtaxed. We're $36 trillion in debt. We had $1 trillion every 100 days. I'm sick of it.
Yeah, the American people are too. So thank you for your efforts on Doge. And you queued up this custodian perfect for us. We're going to talk about that and J.D. Vance's new appointment related to that a little bit later in the show. It's always good to see you, Congressman Burchett. Come back soon.
Ma'am, it's always a pleasure. You got me so fired up now. I'm going to have to go do push-ups to cool off for a minute.
Love it. See you soon.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye.